"Sir, you can't be here." The command snapped like a dry twig in the desert air. Gunnery Sergeant Ramirez stood squared up at the firing line of Black Mesa Range, sleeves tight, jaw tighter, flanked by a row of Marine recon snipers and a horizon that shimmered with heat mirage. The man he was addressing didn't flinch. He was Walter Briggs, 83, sun-creased and steady, wearing a clean work shirt and an old field cap that had seen more summers than anyone on that line. In his hands, wrapped in a faded canvas sleeve, was a long, narrow shape he held like it mattered. "Live Fire Evolution," Ramirez barked, voice carrying over the wind flags and the clatter of steel targets being reset. "Restricted area. Step back behind the red line or I'll have you escorted." Briggs didn't answer. His eyes tracked the range, the way the near grass leaned, the way the dust plumes sheared sideways 1,000 yards out, the way a single pennant at the far berm twitched left while the closer streamer drooped right. He breathed once, twice, listening. A few of the younger Marines traded looks. They'd been missing all morning. Flyers left and low, rounds skipping short, wind calls fighting the math on their wrist computers. The 1-800-yard plate might as well have been on another planet. Ramirez stepped closer, posture hardening. "Sir, this isn't a sightseeing tour." "I'm not asking a third time." Briggs finally spoke, low, even, unhurried. "You've got 3 wins today," he said, eyes still on the distance. "One you feel, one you don't, one that lies." A snort from the line. Someone muttered, "Here we go." Ramirez's stare dropped to the canvas in Briggs's hands. "What's in the roll, Grandpa? A fishing pole? Put it down and move along." Briggs unwrapped just enough to show walnut and parkerized steel. Old, scarred, cared for. Not a chassis rifle. Not carbon fiber. A relic with a soul. "That's enough," Ramirez snapped, reaching for the old man's shoulder. Briggs didn't step back. He looked the gunny squarely in the eye. No challenge, no fear, just a stillness that made the air feel thinner. Down range, the wind flags ticked in 3 different directions. On the line, the tension clicked from irritation to danger. 3 wins. Ramirez's tone dripped disbelief. "That's not how physics works, old man. We've got sensors for this." The younger Marines laughed under their breath. They were sweating under the desert sun, surrounded by an arsenal of precision. Kestrel wind meters, ballistic computers, Doppler radars, each one feeding them readings and equations. And still, no one had hit the target. Walter Briggs didn't smile. He glanced toward the furthest flag, barely fluttering, and then to a stretch of rock halfway down range where heat shimmered like ghosts. "Your tech reads the air right here," he said, tapping the dirt at his feet. "But the bullet doesn't live here. It flies through what you can't measure." Ramirez crossed his arms, defensive. "We're not guessing out here. We account for spin drift, barometric pressure, and Coriolis effect. You think you know better because you can squint at a flag." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly, calm as still water. "No," he said. "I know better because I've watched men die when someone trusted a number instead of the wind." That sentence cut through the line like a blade. A few Marines shifted uneasily. Ramirez stepped closer, trying to claw back control of the moment. "All right, Einstein, what's your story? You run the maintenance crew? Groundskeeper? What gives you the right to walk into my range and lecture my men?" Briggs's hand brushed against the wooden rifle stock wrapped in canvas. His gaze didn't waver. "I used to teach on a range," he said softly. "A long time ago." The gunny chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, this isn't some Boy Scout camp, sir. This is Force Recon. We don't play pretend here." Briggs looked at him then, really looked. "The wind doesn't care who you are," he said. That line hit heavier than anyone expected. For a moment, nobody moved. The desert hummed with heat and silence. Then, from the spotting line, a voice broke the spell. "Gunny," said a young lance corporal. "Maybe we let him take a shot." Ramirez turned sharply. "Evans, you shut your mouth before I have you pulling brass all week." But Evans didn't drop his eyes. He was still staring at the old man, at the steadiness in his stance, the way he seemed to belong to the range more than anyone else there. Something about him felt real. Ramirez's patience was fraying like an old sling. "You want to teach me about wind?" He snapped. "Fine, you take the shot." The range went still. A few Marines smirked, expecting the old man to back down. But Briggs didn't. He simply nodded once and stepped forward, moving with the quiet assurance of someone who'd been here before, maybe not on this exact range, but in this exact kind of moment. He set the wrapped rifle down on the shooting mat and began unrolling it carefully. The canvas peeled back to reveal a rifle that looked like a relic from another war. Walnut stock, blued steel, a scope with no digital readouts or range-finding lasers. Every Marine on the line recognized it immediately. "Is that an M40? Whispered Evans, unable to hide the awe in his voice. Ramirez barked a short laugh. "You've got to be kidding me. That antique's older than half the men here. You sure it even fires, Grandpa?" Briggs didn't answer. He checked the chamber, adjusted the bolt, then settled prone on the mat. His movements were slow, methodical, the kind of slowness that comes from mastery, not hesitation. Ramirez crouched beside him, sarcasm dripping from his tone. "You're about to embarrass yourself in front of Force Recon, old man. Targets are out at 1-800. Nobody's hit it all morning." Briggs didn't look up. "That's because you're aiming at what you see, not what you know." He rested the rifle's stock against his shoulder, breathing through his nose. The world seemed to narrow around him. The Marines faded, the heat shimmered, the distant hills softened into memory. For a split second, he wasn't 83 anymore. The air wasn't dry and still. It was thick, humid, alive with the jungle sounds of a different lifetime. In his mind, the rifle kicked against his shoulder, the smell of gunpowder mixed with mud and fear. A single leaf had told him the truth of the wind that day, and 12 men had lived because of it. Back on the range, the memory vanished as quickly as it came. Briggs exhaled halfway, squeezed the trigger, and the shot cracked like thunder. 2.5 seconds later, the metallic ring of steel echoed across Black Mesa Range, a perfect hit. The ringing echo of the steel plate faded, but the silence that followed was heavier than the shot itself. No one moved. Ramirez's smirk froze halfway. "That was luck," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Briggs sat up slowly, cycling the bolt with the smooth precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. A single spent casing rolled into the dust beside him. "Luck," he said, not looking at the gunny. "Luck doesn't hold at 1,800 yards." Evans, the young spotter, was still peering through his scope, wide-eyed. "Dead center, gunny. I saw it hit." Ramirez turned, jaw clenched. The old man's calm was infuriating. His men were staring at him, not with fear, but with doubt. "And that was worse. You think one shot proves something?" Ramirez said, trying to reclaim command. "That rifle belongs in a museum, not on my range." Briggs turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Funny," he said quietly. "The last time I heard that, I was lying in the mud, 2 clicks north of Quezon. Different uniform. Same arrogance." The words landed like rounds on target. For a heartbeat, the range around them disappeared in Briggs' mind. The shimmering air turned to steam, the ground beneath him to slick red clay. Vietnam, 1968. Rain fell in sheets. His rifle, the same one, was slick with mud and blood. Through the scope, he watched a squad pinned by machine gun fire, men he'd trained, bleeding into the dirt. One pull of the trigger, then another. The sound of rain swallowing gunfire, lives saved by inches. He blinked, and the desert returned. The heat, the light, the ring of steel still humming in the distance. Ramirez was still talking, but the words didn't matter. Briggs wasn't there to win an argument. He was there because something in him couldn't watch pride humiliate wisdom. Evans finally spoke, unable to help himself. "Gunny, maybe he should stay, just for one more round." Ramirez shot him a glare, but behind it was hesitation, the kind that comes when certainty starts to crumble. Briggs stood, brushing the dust from his knees. "You don't have to like me, Sergeant," he said. "But the wind doesn't care who's holding the rifle." He started to reload. Ramirez's jaw tightened. "All right, that's enough," he snapped. "This range is off limits to civilians. Step away from the weapon, sir." Briggs didn't move. He simply looked back through the scope, as if the younger man's anger was just another gust of wind passing by. "Gunny," Evans said hesitantly, his voice carrying a note of warning. "Maybe we should—" "Quiet," Ramirez barked. "This isn't a debate." He took a step closer, his boots grinding into the gravel. The air between them felt charged, heavy. He placed a firm hand on Briggs's shoulder. "You're leaving. Now." Evans winced. He could feel the tension vibrating like a live wire. He knew this was wrong. The old man hadn't broken any rules worth escalating, but the gunny's pride had taken over. Evans made a choice. He quietly stepped back from the line, pretending to check his scope, and ducked behind a Humvee. Pulling out his phone, he scrolled to a number he never thought he'd use. The call connected after 2 rings. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Parker. Sir, this is Lance Corporal Evans. Whiskey Range, Force Recon Training. We've got a situation." "Go on," Parker said, voice deep and calm. Evans glanced around, whispering. "Gunny Ramirez is confronting an older guy. Name's Walter Briggs. Groundskeeper, I think. Brought an old rifle to the range. Says he used to teach." There was silence on the other end. Then Parker's tone changed, stripped of all casualness. "Did you say Walter Briggs?" "Yes, Master Guns. He just—" "Listen, carefully, Marine," Parker interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. "Do not touch that man. Do not let anyone touch him. Keep Ramirez away from him, whatever it takes. I'm making a call." The line went dead. Evans lowered the phone, pulse racing. He didn't understand, but the shift in Parker's tone told him one thing. This wasn't just some old man with a rifle. And out on the line, Gunnery Sergeant Ramirez was about to find out why. The rumble started low, a sound too heavy to belong to the wind. Then came the dust, rising on the far edge of the range road. Engines. Multiple. Ramirez froze mid-sentence. Every Marine on the line turned their heads toward the growing plume. 2 black Humvees and a white command truck were tearing across the dirt, tires spitting gravel. Their lights flashed, no sirens, just speed and purpose. Evans stepped out. From behind the Humvee, phone still in hand, his pulse hammering. He actually called someone, he thought. But who? The convoy screeched to a halt just yards from the firing line. Doors swung open before the vehicles even stopped moving. Out stepped Colonel Nathan Briggs, base commander, flanked by the sergeant major of the installation and 2 MPs. The air changed. Every Marine instinctively straightened. Ramirez's hand dropped from his hip like it was on fire. Colonel Briggs, tall, silver hair under his cap, eyes like tempered steel, didn't say a word as he walked forward. He went straight to the old man. For the first time that morning, Walter Briggs, the quiet groundskeeper with the rifle, stood up. The 2 men locked eyes. It was like the world tilted for a moment. Recognition flashed. Not surprise, not confusion, but history. The E, kind of knowing that doesn't come from names on paper, but from nights that never leave you. The colonel came to a stop in front of him. For a moment, he just looked at the rifle. Then, slowly, he brought his hand up in the sharpest, most deliberate salute the Marines had ever seen. "Chief Warrant Officer Briggs," he said, his voice steady but thick. "Sir, it's an honor to see you again." The range fell silent. The young Marines stared, stunned. Ramirez's face went pale. The colonel turned to him, voice cutting like a blade. "Gunnery Sergeant, stand down." Ramirez swallowed. "Sir, I didn't know—" "No," the colonel interrupted. "You didn't." He turned back to the stunned formation. "Marines, allow me to introduce one of the finest marksmen this corps has ever produced. The man who taught me everything I know about wind, range, and patience. The man whose doctrine you still read in sniper school, even if you don't know his name." He looked back at Walter. The ghost of Than Fong. A ripple went through the ranks. The name wasn't in any manual, but every sniper had heard it whispered in training. A legend from Vietnam. A man who could read wind by the way rain hit his sleeve, and he was standing right there, holding the same rifle. The colonel's words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Heavy, undeniable. The silence that followed was sacred, fragile, the kind you don't dare break. Then Colonel Briggs turned to the young Marines, his voice lowering, calm but sharp as a rifle report. "You've been out here all morning, trusting computers more than your own eyes. You think precision comes from a device." He paused, letting the words sting. "It doesn't. It comes from understanding what the wind is telling you. And he," the colonel said, pointing toward the old man, "could hear it better than anyone I've ever met." Walter said nothing. He simply walked back toward the firing line. His movements were slow, deliberate, not from weakness, but control. He knelt, resting the old rifle on his weathered rucksack. "This rifle," he said softly, "doesn't calculate or correct. It just listens." He adjusted the scope. No fancy turrets, no ballistic computer, just instinct and years burned into his bones. The Marines leaned forward, barely breathing. Walter looked downrange, studying the ripples of heat, the flick of grass, the shimmer of air over stone. "You've been reading data," he murmured, "but data can't feel the wind." He took a long breath, let half of it out, and pulled the trigger. The old rifle cracked, deep, thunderous, defiant. A second later, the distant steel target rang out, clear and perfect. The Marines erupted into spontaneous applause. The colonel smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Still got it," he muttered. Ramirez just stood there, staring, his mouth slightly open. Walter rose slowly, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Technology's a fine thing," he said, looking directly at the younger Marine. "But if you stop listening to the world around you, you stop being a marksman and start being a machine." For the first time that day, Ramirez didn't argue. He simply nodded, humbled. When the echo of the shot finally faded, the range stayed silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Colonel Briggs spoke. "Marines," he said, his voice steady and deliberate, "what you witnessed today isn't about nostalgia. It's about fundamentals. The rifle changes, the technology changes, but the principles, patience, awareness, respect, those never do." He turned to Walter. "You've just reminded us what we forgot." Walter gave a small, tired smile. "You didn't forget," he said. "You just stopped listening." A murmur rippled through the formation, not of embarrassment but of respect. Ramirez lowered his head, his pride replaced with something far heavier. Humility. Gunnery. "Sergeant," the colonel continued, "you and your team will report back here tomorrow morning. Mr. Briggs will instruct you personally. Consider it a refresher in real marksmanship." "Yes, sir," Ramirez answered quietly. The colonel saluted the old man one last time, crisp and sharp. Walter returned it slowly. A gesture not of rank, but of shared understanding. Weeks later, the atmosphere at the range had transformed. The young Marines sat cross-legged on the dirt, rifles beside them, listening to the old man talk about wind, mirage, and patience. They called it the Briggs Doctrine. Ramirez never forgot that day. Neither did Evans. And years later, when a new generation of snipers trained under the same blue sky, the lesson endured. The rifle doesn't make the marksman. The marksman makes the rifle. Years passed, and the story of that day at Whiskey Ridge Range became legend. New recruits heard whispers about the old man with the wooden rifle, the one who could read the wind like scripture. Officially, it was entered into the Corps' sniper curriculum as the Briggs method, but among the Marines, it had another name: the day the wind stood still. Ramirez eventually rose in rank, teaching young marksmen himself. On his office wall, beside the formal commendations and certificates, hung a single photo. A weathered man kneeling behind an old M40 rifle, eyes steady, wind tugging at his hair. Underneath, handwritten in faded ink, were 4 words: "Listen before you shoot." Evans, too, carried the lesson forward, not as doctrine, but as memory. He'd tell younger Marines about the quiet man who reminded them that mastery wasn't in power, but perception. And somewhere far from the base, Walter Briggs tended a small garden behind his house. Rows of tomato plants swayed gently in the evening breeze. He would pause sometimes, watching the leaves move, smiling faintly as if the wind itself was speaking. When people asked if he ever missed the Corps, he would shake his head. "The Corps is in good hands," he'd say, "as long as they remember to feel before they fire." Because legends, after all, don't live in textbooks or medals. They live in the silence before the shot, in the calm breath of a man who still knows how to listen. Years later, long after the dust of Whiskey Ridge had settled, a new group of snipers gathered on the same stretch of earth. The technology was newer, the rifles sleeker, but on the small plaque mounted near the firing line, a few simple words were etched into the brass. Dedicated to Chief Warrant Officer Walter Briggs, who taught us to hear the wind. Every Marine who trained there knew the story, not from manuals, not from briefings, but from whispered retellings between shots, passed down like folklore. They said that when the wind picked up just right, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the faint crack of an old M40 echo through the hills. And maybe, just maybe, the voice of a calm old man saying, "Don't just aim, understand." The range would go quiet then, not out of superstition but out of respect, because somewhere beyond the sound of steel and gunfire, Walter Briggs' lesson lived on. The wind never lies. You just have to listen. That plaque at Whiskey Ridge became more than a tribute. It became a promise. Every Marine who stepped onto that range was told the same thing. Out here, we don't chase perfection. We chase understanding. Decades later, when recruits stood under the same sun, their instructors still spoke the name Walter Briggs with quiet reverence. Not as myth, not as legend, but as a man who had once walked among them, who taught them that the measure of a marksman isn't found in the shot, but in the silence before it. Because in that silence lives everything he left behind. Patience, humility, and respect for the wind that speaks to those willing to listen. And so, with every bullet sent down range, with every whisper of wind crossing the desert or mountain, a small part of Walter Briggs still teaches, reminding those who serve that wisdom doesn't grow old. It just grows quiet.